Olha o contra-ataque aí. Vem que vem o time avançando rápido pela linha de campo. Bola dominada no pé do camisa 10. Ele vai pra cima, passou pelo primeiro, passou pelo segundo. Invadiu a grande área, vai chutar. Bateu, é gol! Que golaço, minha gente!
A experiência de futebol mais autêntica já criada para os games. Junte-se no 5v5 Rush, a nova maneira de jogar com os amigos e leve seu clube para a vitória. EA Sports FC 25. Dê tudo pelo clube. Já disponível.
Interrompemos esse podcast para perguntar: quem você quer ser?
Designer, engenheira, pedagoga,
administrador.
Quer saber? O Senac EAD é nota máxima no MEC. Tem cursos de diversas áreas, com conteúdo elaborado por especialistas do mercado e professores mestres e doutores. Ainda tem o Senac Carreiras, conectando estudantes a vagas de emprego em todo o país. Saiba mais em ead.senac.br/graduação.
Welcome, everyone, to the G-Note Podcast. I am your host, Jason Spicy G. Goldman, and I'm a Grammy-winning record producer, arranger, and musician. I've been a music professor at the University of Southern California for over 22 years, and I am most known for writing and producing music for the iconic Michael Bublé over the past 20 years. This is a pod for musicians who want advice and strategies on navigating the music industry. If you're not a musician but a music fan, I promise, as always, there is plenty in here for you as well. On this pod, we talk all things music. On today's pod, I'm talking about the day that I realized I finally was a record producer. Let's go. All right, what's happening, everyone? Thanks for joining the pod today. For those that have been listening to this pod, you know I often talk about the ups and downs of the business, and I try to keep it real as much as I can. And I often incorporate my life stories into the topics that I discuss. I've spoken about my successes and, of course, my failures, which, again, is always kind of embarrassing, but at the same time, I feel like it's really important so that you can learn from some of my mistakes. Today, I want to discuss the moment when I finally felt like I became a real record producer. Now, keep in mind, and I've mentioned this before, I did not start producing music until I was in my 30s. So in the music business, that is, especially in today's like pop world, that's late, And to put it into perspective, many of the bigger producers today, with the not including the iconic producers, but especially like the young pop producers, a lot of them are between 18 and 25. And the music industry is always looking for the next big thing, be it artist or producer. As many of you know who are musicians, or if you don't know, I'm going to tell you now. I mean, the music industry can make even the happiest of souls and happiest of people become quite jaded. Much of it has to do with, trying to find opportunities, as those are extremely scarce, and people trying to take advantage of you or, in any way, shape, or form. And I've spoken about, how for me personally, you have to make people believe in you, whether they want to or not. And how I am always trying to create opportunities, right? That's one of my big things. If you listen, you know that I say this a lot. Today's story, as I mentioned at the top of the program, is about the moment when I felt I was really a record producer. And I don't know if most people have this type of like, oh my God moment, but it happened to me. So let's get into it a little bit. So on the second episode of this podcast that I ever did, which was, I think at this point, about 38 episodes ago, I spoke about a guy named Zach Katz. And if you haven't heard that episode, I definitely recommend it. It's one of my favorite episodes. And you should check it out because I think it's a pretty cool story. But Zach at the time was one of the biggest people in the music industry. Just the quick recap, he was the vice president of BMG Publishing, which is one of the biggest music publishers. and was really in charge of finding talent for the publishing company. And as I mentioned on that episode, I actually met Zach through one of my best friends, and he was my college roommate as well, J.R. Rodham, who coincidentally is a legendary producer. You know, he found Jason Derulo, produced for Fall Out Boy, Britney Spears, Avril Lavigne. I mean, pretty much Beyonce, any big artist, he probably has worked with them. And JR was really the catalyst for me becoming a producer. In that episode, I discussed how I would bring music into Zach every 2 to 3 months at BMG. He would, the process was always the same. He would listen, not really say too much, and then I would leave, always feeling like, what the hell just happened? And again, a little backstory. At this point in my career, I was really focusing on pop production. And everyone knows I'm a jazz musician. Almost everything I do is jazz, but I needed to learn how to produce music, and pop production was a skill I needed to learn. Mostly because the skills needed to do that are being able to, run the computer software side of things, creating sounds, recording instruments, creating backing tracks, tuning vocals. These were all things that I had never done before, so I had to learn these things. And another reason is because if I could produce, well, I could potentially be self-sufficient in producing for myself and for other people, which, as you probably realize, means that I would have another revenue stream in my arsenal, which is obviously really important in music, and I've talked about that a lot on this program as well. So I remember the first time I brought music into Zach. He was still a manager for JR at the time. I think he was originally a lawyer, then moved over to management. And I showed him the first EP I ever produced. I think it's actually still online somewhere. And I was excited about it. I brought it in, and I remember he sat down with JR and JR's brother, and they listened to the 5 songs. And when they finished listening, Zach said, "Cool. Thanks for showing." And I sat there for a second. And I was like, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And, I was just kind of baffled. Like, what do you mean? What do I mean? How could he not know what I meant? Am I a superstar producer or what? And Zach says, the songs, the artists, the production are average at best. And he says, "You're not ready." So I just sat there and I was like, whoa, what? The only other person who spoke that bluntly to me ever was the legendary, producer David Foster. And now this guy Zach just laid it right down for me, or to me. And that was it. So Zach moved over to BMG, as I mentioned, and I continued to bring music into him for nearly a year. When, this is when he had already moved to BMG, like I said, and he would just say the songs are okay. I remember in one meeting when I asked him what he thought about the production, even if it wasn't a good song or he didn't think the song was good enough, he said to me, if the song was good enough, I'd have to give it to another producer. And of course I was kind of baffled. I said, "Well, why?" He said, "It's not good enough. It doesn't sound like the radio." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "You wanted to be in this game, right?" And I said, I remember saying this specifically. I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "Great. You're competing with Max Martin, Benny Blanco, Alex the Kid. Do you think this production is as good as theirs?" A side note, those 3 producers are some of the biggest producers. In particular, Max Martin is one of the biggest producers of all time, up there with Quincy Jones and David Foster and George Martin. And so I stopped and I thought about his questions and I said, "No." He said, "Well, if you don't think it's at that level, it's not good enough." I just was like, "What?" He said, "If you're trying to compete in Max's lane, you're never going to win. You're not going to beat Max at Max." Basically implying that I needed to find my own voice and sound as a producer. And I remember sitting there thinking for like 30 seconds, just in silence, as he stared at me and thinking, well, he's just right. You know, it's hard to admit those types of things, but I'm usually pretty good at judging once I hear, someone just outwardly say it. So right around this time, I started working with a fantastic vocalist and songwriter named Jordan Vincent. He's a guy from Delaware. He moved to LA, I think, maybe a year prior to us getting together. And he was recommended to me by a songwriter I had written with one time named Bobby. I can't even remember his last name, actually. And Jordan and I had written a song called Nobody Knows. Let me play a little snippet of it so you can hear it.
I could rewind, and I catch a freeze frame before this moment goes away. I don't want to fade away. I'm all alone and nobody knows. I'm all alone.
Man, I still really dig that song. And I remember bringing this into Zach with 4 other songs, because I always brought in 5. And typically Zach would listen to 30 seconds to like a minute of a song and stop the song and move on. No comments. But this one, he listened to almost the entire song. And at the end, he said, "Who is this?" And I was like kind of stunned for a second. I said, "Well, it's this guy, Jordan Vincent." He said, "You need to keep working with him." And now, again, this was the first time Zach ever said anything to me that was definitive at all. He said, "This sounds interesting and has a vibe. You guys connect well. You need to keep working with him." So I was like completely shocked, like, because he, again, a year and no comments, and now all of a sudden he finally said something. So I was, of course, ecstatic. So the next time I went to see Zach, I brought in 5 songs that I had done only with Jordan, not other songwriters this time. And he actually listened to a good portion of each song. But one song, he actually listened to all the way to the end. Again, which is, he just really didn't do that. This was a song that Jordan had already written the lyrics for, and that I produced, called Dear Sister Jill. After the song finished playing, he looked up from his phone and, first of all, side note, he was always looking at his phone when I was playing him music. Always. I mean, he was just either texting or on his email, whatever. He was never looking at me, never looking anywhere else but his phone. And he looks up and he said, "The production is great on this song." He said, "This is your best production, and this is the level the production needs to be all the time." And I was shocked. Like, I just sat there for a second. After 2 years of barely, any feedback, or almost 2 years of any feedback, no positive things to say, he finally had something to say. The song was never released, and, I thought about potentially pitching it to other artists, but I just don't think that any other artist can actually sing this song the way that Jordan can sing it. So hopefully one day in our lives we will release the song, but it's not mastered right now. So you'll hear that maybe the vocals may be a little bit quieter than they probably would be in the end. But I still wanted to play it for you because I think you're going to really understand what I'm talking about in terms of the production. And it wasn't till I finally thought about the production and what Zach was, talking about, did I understand what he really meant by the production. Because when I go back and listen to it, I was like, now I understand why he really liked the song. There's a vibe on it that I just kind of stumbled upon, and that was my thing.
Dear Sister Jill, don't take all your pills this morning. A blue one, a round one, a big and a small one, who's counting? Numb to the spine, just to get by your workday. You're only 16 and you're out on the scene, and I miss you, I do.
forgot how amazing this song is. Again, Jordan is a insane lyric writer, and actually this is my wife's favorite song I think that I've ever done. I've worked with a lot of songwriters throughout my career, as you can imagine, and still to this day, Jordan is by far the most creative, unique, and interesting lyric writer that I've worked with. He just has such colorful ways of talking about things. So, I mean, it's such a fantastic song. Sadly, Jordan and I only released 2 songs together, even though we have probably about at least 24 songs in the can. And they're all fantastic. And, you know, his lyrics were always very inspiring to produce around. And I did add lyric things to what we were writing, but my things were always like one line of the chorus or something that would spur the idea of a song. But Jordan, most of the time, wrote the lyrics. You know, Jordan had kind of a rough go of it in Los Angeles, as many writers often do. You know, it's the same for, like I said, most artists. You have a dream to be an artist, you move to LA, you hustle to get work, you do a lot of things for free, and you make almost no money on music, and finally you have to leave because it's just too freaking expensive to live here. So Jordan ended up moving back to Delaware, and he is an insanely talented lyricist and musician, and I learned a ton from working with him. People often ask me why I kept going in for so long and showing Zach music if he never gave me any feedback or any positive things at all. And, you know, I always tell people, of course it was trying. You know, how would that not be trying? But if you want to be the best, you need to work with the best. You need to understand their language. You need to prove to them that you can hang with the best and be the best. I always knew Zach was one of the best. I mean, he managed and worked with huge talent. He broke artists and was connected. You know, he was as connected as you can be really in the industry. I don't need people to tell me how good I am. That doesn't really get me very far. I mean, yeah, it's certainly nice and I certainly appreciate it. But what I needed was honesty to get where I wanted to go as quickly as possible. And you can't do that when people aren't really honest with you. And Zach was the epitome of honesty. After leaving Zach's office, I got on the elevator. You know, he was, of course, on the top floor with this office the size of a, you know, like, whatever, 1,500, 2,000 square feet. It was, like, insane. Overlooking Hollywood. And I remember getting on the elevator. You know, no one was with me. I got on the elevator, and I started going down on the elevator, and I specifically remember saying, and I had these butterflies in my stomach, like I couldn't believe it. And I said out loud, I'm telling you a true story. I said out loud, I did it. Finally, I'm a record producer. Folks, that's all the time we have for today's episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this pod so you can stay up to date with new shows, giveaways, and more importantly, folks, come to the concerts. The holiday season is coming up, and we are playing at the Vibrato, my big band. You should come and check it out. You can check it out at the Vibrato website, or you can follow me on Instagram at SpicyGMusic, or check out my website, jasongoldmanmusic.com, to see what projects I'm currently working on and to see when I'll be performing next. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Much love. Peace.